This is not the type of activity you would expect to see or hear in the picturesque canyon above Fossil Creek, but it certainly is a sign of the times. What began as a marvel of engineering in 1906 is now becoming a marvel of deconstruction as crews work to remove 2 power plants and the network of wooden and concrete flumes that carried water to them. This project is the final step in the rebirth of 14 miles of Fossil Creek. But to appreciate the magnitude of this today, you need to understand a little about the history of this area. Fossil Creek is a rarity in Arizona, a spring-fed creek that provides reliable water flows year-round. At the turn of the century, its location upstream from mining operations and growing towns proved irresistible to dam builders, and the diversion of Fossil Creek began.
When the project was built, it was started in 1907, and initially it was just meant to build one plant, which was a child's power plant down on the Verde River. In 1915, they decided that they could put another plant in right here, which is the Irving plant. We've got one unit in the Irving plant. The wood flume started at the dam, ran it down the side of the mountain, and brought the water into the Irving plant. After it goes through that plant, it goes back into the original flume for Childs.
The old wooden flumes still cling to the sides of the canyon, a reminder of the Herculean effort that must have gone into building them 100 years ago.
The project construction of that magnitude had to be pretty daunting because, as you can see, this whole area there were no roads. All there was a big long canyon with lots of water running through it. So all of the equipment that was brought in, the labor was brought in on horseback and mule trains, and that sort of thing. A lot of the concrete that was mixed and poured was done right on site.
Mike Stewart has been the manager of the Irving Power Plant and lived on site for over 10 years. Now he's in charge of the removal project. With all the time he's spent in the canyon, he knows how important the area is to local wildlife.
There's just about everything here. The elk don't come down this low, but we've got mountain lions. There's lots of javelina in this area. There's eagles. We see eagles quite often. The common blackhawk, which is a blackhawk with a white stripe on his tail, there's lots of those that nest in this canyon.
The 2 plants were still producing about 4 megawatts of power in 1999 when Arizona Public Service decided voluntarily to shut down operations on the creek and decommission the plants. Several years of planning and preparation were required before the decommissioning could occur. The Arizona Game and Fish Department worked hand in hand with many other agencies, including the Bureau of Reclamation, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and the U.S. Forest Service on a native fish restoration project in advance of the return of full water flows.
Partnerships in wildlife conservation are the only way that the Arizona Game and Fish Department can accomplish some of our objectives. The Fossil Creek Restoration Project involved numerous federal partners, Arizona Public Service as a private entity, non-governmental organizations, environmental groups. All of these people have an interest and a stake in what happens to wild places and wild animals in Arizona. The only way we can manage them is working with them to help us formulate and make decisions on the future of wildlife in Arizona.
But restoring full flows to Fossil Creek meant more than just shutting down the plants and opening the gate. The Native Fish Restoration Project took years to plan and included building a barrier about 2/3 the way down the river to keep non-native fish from swimming too far upstream. Once the barrier was in place, the native species had to be caught and removed from the stream, which was no simple task. To keep the stress on the fish at a minimum, they were long-lined or flown out by helicopter in 55-gallon drums. Once the barrels were safely on the landing zone, they were trucked a short distance to special holding tanks and into the care of experts from the Arizona Game and Fish Department hatcheries.
I'm happy that I'm part of this, and I enjoy what I do, and I enjoy what our department does to ensure that we maintain the environment, maintain our fish populations and big game.
The native fish that were salvaged included speckled dace, round-tailed chub, sonora, and desert suckers. After Fossil Creek had been cleared of the non-native species that were a threat to the native fish, the process was reversed and the salvaged fish were returned to the creek as quickly as possible.
Yeah, what you just have to watch out for on these, when you have a long line, a 100-foot line, is when you get down, some of these holes are in between the trees. You want to make sure that the hook goes down nice and straight. You don't want to get anything where it's oscillating around when you got a load on it. You don't want anybody to get, between the load and a hard spot of rock or anything.
This is probably one of the greatest projects I will ever work on in my entire life. This is the kind of project we all dream about doing. You rarely get 9.5 miles of stream that are just given back to you.
To give the fish a chance to recover, the Arizona Game and Fish Department has closed Fossil Creek to fishing until December 31st, 2008. The department believes the area could one day become a blue ribbon fishery for round-tailed chub. In June of 2005, the diversion dam was officially closed and Fossil Creek roared back to life. Prior to having 95% of its flow diverted to the power plants, Fossil Creek supported a distinctive aquatic ecosystem. The highly mineralized water resulted in travertine dams that created large pools and cascading waterfalls. Now that the full flow of 43 cubic feet per second has been restored, those dams, pools, and waterfalls are expected to rebuild naturally over time. With tourists already flocking to the creek to play in the cool water, APS began the less glamorous job of removing the remains of the power plants.
We shut down in June of 2005 with a proposed schedule of almost 5 years. Well, it's going to take us, by the time we get everything cleaned out, and because a lot of the work, once we get everything out, it has to be recontoured. We have to reseed with native vegetation. So it's going to take 5 years. It'll be the middle of 2010 before we're done. The reason for demolition of the flume is we have to put everything back to its natural state. On the concrete flume, which we just went down and looked at, watched them take out, that's a little easier than the wood flume that we're taking out up above Irving. It's like railroad tie timbers, and it's all on trestle. It's a little more hazardous, and it has to be taken out because of that, because we have a lot of tourists come into this area and it's not safe to leave it there.
Two of the structures at the child's site will remain as historical elements so that the plants that once powered early Arizona and the people who built them won't be forgotten. To help protect the creek's future, it has been proposed that it be added to the nation's Wild and Scenic Rivers program. That designation would help preserve the character of the creek while still allowing access to the public lands that surround it.